Tonight on Ukraine Today, night of terror, killed, wounded and major destruction, the result of a massive Russian attack on Ukraine. Transport chaos in Russia. Ukrainian drones caused delays and cancellations of dozens of flights and trains. 43 days to a ceasefire. How will Trump's ultimatum influence the Russian dictator Putin? A new phase of tension between Baku and Moscow, from Aliyev's words of support for Ukraine to a lawsuit over the downing of an Azerbaijani airplane. All that and more, right now. Hi, my name is Volodymyr Robchun. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get to the news. 2 people killed, 15 wounded, including a 12-year-old boy. This is the result of a massive Russian strike on Ukraine. Civilian infrastructure was damaged in Kyiv and the region, in Kharkiv and in Ivano-Frankivsk regions. Drones also flew over Sumy, Khmelnytsky, Kirovograd, Mykolaiv, Poltava and Kherson regions. One of the Russian drones hit the entrance area of the Lukyanivska subway station in Kyiv. People were hiding there during the air raid. The underground area filled with smoke. The station is now fully operational again. In the frontline regions like Sumy, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, Russian troops continue to terrorize civilians with shelling and drone attacks. Casualties and injuries reported. Russian forces also made gains in the Donetsk region. More on that in our military update.
Our forces are reclaiming positions in the Kharkiv region and in Donetsk Oblast. The Russians are pressing on Pokrovsk and are trying to launch a renewed offensive on Sumy. New Chechen units have appeared on the front, along with some unique national approaches to mining. A spectacular incident where Russians blew up a neighboring unit was caught on video. These and other frontline updates from the past 24 hours.
This is very sharp indeed, extremely sharp.
Traditionally, the Pokrovsk direction remains the most difficult on the front. A third of all attacks are concentrated here. This is also where the highest number of enemy drone deployments is recorded. However, this has not yielded any significant results. That's why the occupiers' command is now considering the possibility of deploying armored vehicles here.
The Russians are trying to conduct intense combat operations here every day at the same level without easing the pressure on our defense forces. Accordingly, we are talking about the Konstantinovka direction and about Novopavlovka as well. The situation here is very difficult. The enemy is trying to advance, but at the same time, our units are also carrying out counterattacks. In particular, we are talking about the fact that the Ukrainian flag has returned to the settlement of Yalta. Well, now, this is not the Yalta in Crimea. Nevertheless, these positions were recaptured from the enemy. There has been some progress in the area of the settlement of Komar. In other words, these are the settlements that are key in the Donetsk direction.
At the same time, the defense forces have also achieved certain successes in the Zaporizhzhia region. There, the Ukrainian armed forces are using maneuverable defense and counter-attacking the enemy according to the command. In particular, Ukrainian units lure the Russians into traps and then go on the attack. In this way, they manage to regain some of the previously lost positions.
Well, I don't want to reveal too much, let's say, but with what we have, we've managed to restore certain positions in some directions, particularly in the area of Orikiv. Where our units are operating, they are acting quite successfully, which is why we've managed to regain some positions. There aren't many, but we're not only trying to hold our territories, we're also, let's say, carrying out counterattacks.
Analysts say that Russian losses in this direction, and indeed along the entire front line, are truly record-breaking. In the past 24 hours alone, the occupiers have lost, as usual, more than 1,000 of their soldiers. At the same time, Russia's clumsiness often works in our favor. For example, there was a recorded incident where soldiers decided to lay mines on a road near their own positions, but forgot to warn the neighboring units about it. As a result, the mine barrier was triggered by a Russian vehicle. And now there simply aren't enough Russians left to patch up all these gaps in the Russian units. For this reason, a new regiment was formed in Chechnya, which has already been deployed to southern Ukraine.
Why is this regiment here? It is simply a reinforcement, let's say, for those units that have suffered heavy losses and they are indeed taking significant losses. Specifically, the army of the Southern Military District, they have, as we say, really worn themselves out here. And so this regiment has come to make up for their losses and to help in certain directions, particularly in the Orikhiv and Huliapol sectors.
Sumy region is also experiencing its fourth wave of attempts to break through the defensive line. Here, for the first time in a while, a slight enemy advance has been recorded about a kilometer. However, according to the Ukrainian armed forces, this is essentially just movement within the gray zone, which does not significantly affect the situation.
It seems that this tactical advance I mentioned is, let's say, a deliberate attempt to effectively counter the persistent counterattacks by our resilient defense forces, which have already successfully led to the complete stabilization of the front line in the Sumy region. That's the crucial first point. Secondly, we have even managed to recapture some positions, and throughout counterattacks we have, so to speak, disrupted certain Russian army units which have lost control, become demoralized, and are losing their combat effectiveness.
Kharkiv region is also successfully repelling Russian attempts to advance deeper into the area today. The main fighting here is taking place over the settlement of Vovchansk, where for several weeks now the enemy has been unsuccessfully trying to capture the aggregates plant.
Speaking specifically about the fighting in the city, it's important to understand that Ukraine's defense forces continue to hold some territory on the northern bank of the Vovcha River, namely on the grounds of the aggregate plant. The enemy tries every day, day and night, to infiltrate the territory of this plant in order to push our units back beyond the natural barrier of the Vovcha River, but the Russians have not achieved any success in this. That's why we're seeing the enemy now trying to bypass the city from the flanks.
At the same time, the topic of the second phase of the Russian offensive is being actively discussed in the press. They say that the first spring-summer phase is now ending, and after it will come the summer-autumn phase. However, the Center for Countering Disinformation has refuted such claims. Meanwhile, analysts, for their part, believe that we may soon see a counter-offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine. The Washington Post reports that Trump has urged Zelensky to launch a counter-attack and is ready to support such a scenario.
In a conversation with Zelensky, Trump allegedly asked, "Why aren't we striking Moscow?" To which Zelensky replied, "Well, give us something to strike with and we will." Later, Trump denied this. But according to the publication, Trump told Zelensky that Ukraine would not change the course of the war by fighting defensively and therefore needs to go on the offensive. On Monday, July 21st, a meeting of the contact group on Ukraine's defense issues will take place. This is the Ramstein group, which, by the way, will be joined by Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth. Trump has somewhat changed his attitude toward the war. It is possible that they will also discuss new weapons there that could help us launch such an offensive.
In the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,170 soldiers killed and wounded. That brings the total number of Russian losses since the full-scale invasion to 1,043,160. Ukraine's defense forces also destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 7 armored vehicles, 54 artillery systems, and dozens of other enemy weapons. This is what several Russian airports looked like over the weekend. Delays, cancellations, overcrowded terminals, and angry passengers. A complete collapse hit Moscow's Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo and Domodedovo airports, as well as Kaluga airport. And why? Because Russia started this war, and now it's facing the consequences of its unprovoked aggression. Ukrainian drones also hit railway infrastructure in Russia's Rostov region, a logistics hub used by Russian army to move weapons and equipment to the front lines. Putin has 43 days left to agree to a ceasefire. If he doesn't, there will be more sanctions on Russia. That's the condition set by the US President Donald Trump in his 50-day ultimatum. These sanctions would also target countries that buy Russian oil and, in doing so, help finance the Kremlin's war. Here's what the US Senator Lindsey Graham said about it.
China, India, and Brazil. If you keep buying cheap Russian oil, to allow this war to continue, we're going to tariff the hell out of you, and we're going to crush your economy, because what you're doing is blood money. You're buying cheap Russian oil at the expense of the world, and President Trump is tired of this game. If I were President Putin, I would get to the table soon, because he's about to get crushed.
Ukraine and Russia may hold negotiations this week, according to the independent Turkish edition. The two sides could meet in Istanbul on Wednesday or Thursday. The makeup of the delegations hasn't been revealed, and that's a shame, because the Russian side is often very telling. Putin has previously sent fake teams whose only job was to create a media illusion and waste time. But that was before Trump's 50-day ultimatum. So let's see if the talks actually happened, who joins them, and what they even talk about. We're following it closely.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Ukraine has asked Russia to send deported Ukrainians to the Ukrainian border, not the Georgian one, like it's happening right now. Why? Because on the Russian-Georgian border, Ukrainians are being held in inhuman conditions, locked in basements, without food. Here's the full report.
So basically, here's the exit. The border is over there, that's Georgia. And right here is where we live.
Ukrainians are stuck in the buffer zone between Russia and Georgia.
Russia is constantly deporting Ukrainian citizens through Verkhney Lars. But we've never dealt with this many people at once before. According to our information, people are now being brought to the border from all over Russia. From Volgograd, Engels, Tula, Tambov, Elista, Oriol. All of them had been held in deportation centers for foreign citizens for a very long time. Apparently, an order for deportation came from above.
At the Daryal checkpoint, which is on the border between the Russian Federation and Georgia, dozens of Ukrainians remain trapped.
In short, the current situation, the overall situation is just absolutely dire indeed.
Among them are former prisoners who were expelled from Russian prisons, including from the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine.
Look, some of these people have already been here for months. There is absolutely no space, no air. Look, wet clothes are being dried wherever people can find a spot. Here, look. Someone is feeling unwell. He has asked the doctors for help several times, but no one listens to him. The doctors don't provide any treatment at all. Absolutely nothing is being done. Look at how terrible the conditions are here. A fire could break out here at any moment. There are exposed wires here.
The Georgian side provided us with food supplies. The pate is slightly expired, and the canned stew is almost 6 months past its expiration date.
The cans have swollen.
Some of the cans are already starting to give out. Well, we're forced to treat them.
The current Georgian authorities, who are extremely close to the Russian government, refuse to let Ukrainians cross the border until they receive confirmation from the Ukrainian embassy in Tbilisi.
This is how we live. This is our life here. On top of that, there aren't enough places for everyone. We sleep in shifts. There are crowds of people everywhere. This is how we live.
People are forced to live in harsh, unsanitary conditions.
There are already 90 Ukrainian citizens in the basement at Upper Lars or in Daryali, on the Georgian side. There are only 17 beds there. There's no air there. In this heat, close to 40 degrees, it's hell. These people have no access to fresh air. They're not allowed outside. There is no toilet there. To use the toilet, they are taken out one by one under escort. Some people have been there for a month and a half already.
Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha believes that Russia is using the deportation of Ukrainian citizens through Georgia as a tool of pressure. We are actively working with the Georgian and Moldovan sides on the transit of our remaining people to Ukraine. However, there are no guarantees that Russia will not increase the number of deportees even further. The minister suggested that Russia transport these people directly to the Ukrainian border. To avoid further complications, we are publicly proposing that Russia send these categories of Ukrainian citizens directly to the Ukrainian border. We will be ready to receive them from there. After meeting with the foreign minister, the president of Ukraine stated that Ukrainian diplomats are working on organizing the transit of citizens to Ukraine. They are essentially being dumped from Russian territory without documents and without warning either Ukraine or the Georgian side. Ukrainian diplomats are working on organizing the transit of our country's citizens to Ukraine. According to the organization Tbilisi Volunteers, among those at the checkpoint are people from various categories, including those who have never committed criminal offenses and have no criminal record. Some of them were indeed previously convicted, but they have already served their sentences and have the right to a full life. They do not pose any unlawful threat.
It is assumed that 60% of the former inmates may have HIV, and most have tuberculosis in a latent form. It is unknown how these diseases will progress as a result of being kept in a basement. One of the people in the basement is disabled and uses crutches. Last night he felt unwell and an ambulance had to be called.
In June, Ukrainian citizens were already evacuated from Georgia to Moldova. But at the moment, Moldova has closed transit for Ukrainian citizens who were deported to Georgia from Russia. The Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs claims that they are holding negotiations with Kyiv and Chisinau. There is a deportation prison in Tbilisi with basic conditions: water, 3 meals a day, medical care, but these people are not being transferred there. Russian migration authorities are bringing many people to the border, and checking everyone could take months, if not years. The increase in the number of deportees is linked to a decree by Putin that has come into force, according to which Ukrainians must either legalize their status or leave the country by the 10th of September 2025. The decision also applies to Ukrainian regions occupied by Russia. After the 10th of September, the influx is expected to be even greater.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And don't forget to like this video, comment and share if you think it's worth it. Thank you. Hungarian Prime Minister Orban is threatening to block the EU's 2028-2034 budget. This budget includes 100 billion euros for Ukraine's recovery. Orban says he'll never support a plan that, quote, takes money from Hungarians and gives it to Ukraine and destroys the well-being of farmers. Orban is a populist. He brought up the farmers on purpose, even though the EU budget includes nothing that would actually hurt Hungarian agriculture. But in Hungary, anything connected to farming is extremely sensitive. So Orban is using that to score political points. He also knows he can't really block the EU budget. It's approved by a qualified majority, not unanimously. In the end, this may just be his way of showing loyalty to Kremlin. Ukraine must never accept the occupation of its territories. That's the strong message from Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev, speaking at the Shusha Global Media Forum.
I once had the chance to respond to a question from a Ukrainian representative at one event a few years ago. The question was more or less the same. And my answer today will be no different from what I said back then. And I believe it reflects the hopes of the Ukrainian people. Never agree to occupation. That's the main advice. That's what we did.
By the way, Ukrainian troops gave President Aliyev military patches from their units. This made Russian propagandists furious. But seriously, who cares what Russian propagandists think? Other than the Russian propagandists. And one more thing. Azerbaijan is preparing to sue Russia over the downing of a civilian airplane. That attack happened on December 25, 2024, when Russian troops shot down a jet of Azerbaijani Airlines. More on this new phase in Baku-Moscow confrontation in our report.
It hasn't even been a week since President Aliyev openly accused Russia and its military of the Azerbaijani Airlines plane crash, and now the tragic story is taking on new developments. This time, official Baku has threatened Russia with a real lawsuit over the crash of its passenger airliner, in which 38 people died.
A criminal case has been opened regarding the crash of the Azerbaijani Airlines closed joint stock company's civilian aircraft near Aktau on the 25th of December 2024. Investigative activities are continuing intensively. In connection with the incident, parallel investigations are being conducted by the relevant law enforcement agencies in Kazakhstan, Russia and Azerbaijan.
Let me remind you, immediately after the disaster, the Ministry of Transport of Azerbaijan stated that their passenger plane was damaged as a result of external objects impacting it. Baku also claimed that fire was opened on the civilian aircraft by order of the Russian Ministry of Defense. To support their claims, investigators released a recording of the air defense captain who struck the airliner.
Azimuth 338, range 7000, altitude 490, speed 118. Fire! I said fire!
Firing.
After putting all this together, Aliyev issued a note of protest to the Kremlin, which did not even offer an official apology at the highest level. Let me remind you, in December 2024, it was Kadyrov who had to answer for Putin before the president and people of Azerbaijan. Official Moscow has not uttered a single word in the past 6 months or more regarding compensation payments to the families of the victims.
Aliyev has a personal grievance about what is happening around him in Russia, around his interests. I think the grievances are really connected to the fact that there has been no investigation at all into the downplane over the territory of the Chechen Republic, which ultimately crashed in Kazakhstan and was carrying Azerbaijani citizens, among others. There really is no investigation in Russia. There are only preliminary conclusions that, well, something happened to the plane and that's about it. And the Russian authorities are, as usual, trying to sweep this situation under the rug.
However, it's unlikely that the Kremlin will be able to quietly and skillfully cover up the killing of 38 passengers with Baku this time.
If this evidence is verified, it will mean only one thing. The Russian military command deliberately gave the order to shoot down this plane. And moreover, they certainly didn't mistake it for any kind of drone. In other words, fully aware that only civilian aircraft were in the strike zone, clear order was given to destroy it, an order that was repeated twice.
Putin's allies in Baku also won't let him escape responsibility for yet another downing of a passenger airliner. According to experts, Turkey and Armenia will help Azerbaijan speed up the investigation of the tragedy and see the case through to the end.
Russia currently has a very weak position in the Caucasus. It should not be forgotten that Azerbaijan and Turkey have also grown closer to Armenia recently. This counterattack is most likely coordinated by Turkey, Azerbaijan and Armenia. Perhaps there are others involved as well.
The most important thing is that, essentially, this will forever bury the relationship between Russia and Azerbaijan. In other words, this whole situation will move on to the next round of escalation.
However, analysts explain that a serious confrontation between Russia and Azerbaijan is unlikely in the near future. The matter will not go beyond loud statements and legal claims, at least for now.
Aliyev will now try to symbolically jab at Putin. It's like a poke with an umbrella. But as for how deadly this poke with an umbrella will be, I think the answer is obvious. You can jab, but as for going further, well, to be honest, I have my doubts. For now...
However, the tactic of 1,000 cuts hasn't been cancelled either. Without Azerbaijan, it will be much harder for Russia to obtain dual-use goods and bring in parallel imports. And President Aliyev, if he so wished, could instantly make life much more difficult for Putin. And, according to experts, that's exactly what he'll do if the Kremlin doesn't back down and admit its responsibility for the passenger plane disaster over Chechnya, along with all the resulting consequences.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.